So we're gonna move into the third round now, Wiz. This is one of my favorite things that we have on the show sheet, actually, is those running backs that went in the third. And those would be
Yep.
Trey Benson, taken by the Arizona Cardinals, Blake Corum, taken by the Los Angeles Rams,
How about that one,
and
huh?
Marshawn Lloyd, taken by the Green Bay Packers. All of them went in the third round. I think we like these landing spots a lot, all from a varying degree, of course. But why don't you rank these three for 2024? Mainly, I want to see who your favorite is for this coming season, Wiz.
Oh God, for 2024, this is tough, man. Because
We'll talk
when you think
Dino, don't
about,
worry.
yeah, no, I know, but it's a good question for 2024 because they're all behind guys that are like legit fantasy options, right? I will go. I will go, and I'm sorry to do this to my man James Conner, but maybe we see him he takes a bit of a hit on the health side again. He's getting a bit older. This is really close between the three, but I will go Benson, Corum, Lloyd.
Yeah, I think that's how I have it as well. I just love the fact that Benson is attached to a Kyler Murray backfield, has
Yep.
Marvin Harrison Jr. taking a lot of eyes from defenses, and he's kind of that one cut slash runner who I think can succeed really nicely in this offense.
Yeah.
Um, and we've seen James Conner get some targets as well in this offense. And so maybe that can translate down to Trey Benson. This does kill my Michael Carter takes, Wiz. Michael Carter was one of my favorite
Yeah, I
free
remember.
99 buys in
Yep.
Dynasty. I think that's probably dead unless we catch like an injury or two. But man, I think that guy's definitely got some tread still left on the tires. But say la vie, say la vie. Trey Benson's going to be nice. The dynasty perspective is very interesting, but we will get there. For Blake Corum, like he's my second because I've never been the hugest Kyron Williams believer. I
Mhm.
know that he had a monster season last year, but we've kind of seen a lot of guys rotate through that Sean McVay backfield. I think
Yep.
the difference with Kyron Williams is we've never seen any of them blow up like Kyron Williams did. But I think before Kyron Williams was the guy getting the job, Sean McVay wanted it to be Cam Akers and wanted it to be Daryl Henderson. So I think it's like very hot hand approach happening here. And I think if Blake Corum gets some of that run, his hands could get pretty hot in this offense. I think of his red zone prowess, especially because this team is going to be making red zone trips. And I think he's probably a better red zone runner than Kyron Williams. And Kyron Williams, on all that volume and all that production last season, still wasn't the most efficient running back, even though he finished as like a top, I think he's like top 7 or something like that.
Yeah, but from
Um,
points per game perspective, he was like, I think he was RB2. It's
that's right.
crazy.
That's right. So I definitely could take some pie in the face on this one, but I think last season was a bit of a perfect storm for Kyron Williams, being that there was no other backfield
Mhm.
competition. Blake Corum is some serious backfield competition who has eaten carries before, has scored a lot of touchdowns before, and this is an offense that can feed carries and score touchdowns. So, man, like in that best ball draft that I'm in, Wiz, Kyron Williams still went as the 201. And to me, that is way,
Wow. Yeah.
way steep for me because I don't think it's going on a limb to say that Blake Corum's going to come in and get 30% of that work right away. You know what I mean? Like I just have a
Yeah.
hard time seeing that whole pie going straight back to Kyron. I know we saw it last year, so maybe this is crazy talk, but what do you think about that, Wiz? Because I think people aren't giving enough credit to that landing spot and how much damage Corum could do in it.
Yeah, part of me wonders, yeah, and I've seen this kind of circulate a little bit the last couple of days. Like, are we trying to overthink this? That this is another tank and ETN situation, right? Where we see that third round running back and we're worried about them eating into it. A lot of people, including myself, are like, is that going to hurt ETN? I think one of the things that you mentioned is really interesting to see how we're going to see that play out, right? Is that McVay does tend to ride that hot hand a little bit. But one of the things we saw from Kyron last year was as that workload kind of increased and they really did rely on him, he got hurt, right? So
Yeah.
is this more, look, we're still going to kind of ride Kyron like we did last year, but now we've just got a better backup plan if he does go down? Or is this a true, we want to lighten his workload and sub somebody in like a Corum? I kind of lean towards the latter, Trav, right? So I do kind of see your point as far as, yeah, I don't think necessarily Blake Corum is just insurance as a third round pick. So I kind of do lean that he's taken some away from Kyron.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, should be fun either way. That's an offense that we want pieces of. So,
Yep,
Whether you're in best ball drafts, whether you're late in a redraft draft, whether you're in dino drafts, just you want to grab pieces of the Rams offense because there's going to be production happening there. With the running backs, Corum especially, you might just have to kind of wait a little bit to see what he's carving out before you can be confident in relying on him in a flex spot, let's say.
for sure.
Dynasty Wiz, like I was doing those running back rankings, and these guys are all like right in the back of that top 24. So this is super preliminary. I haven't done full digging. This is just kind of my raw, kind of throwing it in there with my thoughts off the dome ski. I've got Trey Benson in that kind of 20 area, then Corum 23, and then Marshawn Lloyd right in that kind of 26 area. So almost a little tier there of these running backs. And maybe I'm a little more bullish on Blake Corum, but would you have, from a dynasty perspective, Marshawn Lloyd ahead of him?
I do have Marshawn Lloyd ahead of Blake Corum.
Yeah.
Um, and the only reason why I say that is because the way that Josh Jacobs' contract is structured
Mhm.
really isn't that 4-year, $48 million deal that a lot of people think it is. I think there's an out after this year. The dead cap's a little bit more. I think it's about close to 11 million, but I think the dead cap number after 25, that second year, is only about 4 million bucks. Right. So, and Kyron is on that rookie deal there for at least the next couple of years. So I think it's just very similar situations, but I lean Lloyd there. I think it's close, Trav. I think when I look at my preliminary rankings here, I've got Lloyd kind of around like that 26 range ish. And I've got, Corum closer to like 33, 30 something around there.
Right.
Just because, look, I do think that to your point, right? Like Kyron's probably going to still get the bulk of that work, and it's going to take an injury for him to really creep up, for Corum to creep up into RB2 territory. As far as Benson goes, look, we've we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. Connor's getting a little bit old in the tooth there. He's been there. He's been super productive. He's been one of the better values in fantasy for his ADP at his age for the last couple of years now. Was still extremely efficient too in that Drew Petzling offense last year, but all signs kind of point to this being the last year. I'd be really surprised if they brought him back. I've got Benson inside my top 15. I've got him at 14 right now.
Oh, is
Yeah.
I'm doing my rankings and I'm like, I'm being fucking spicy here. I got
Yeah.
the Benson is right at running back 20 in Dynasty for me. But I love that, Wiz. I love that. And maybe like the windows that we're evaluating our Dynasty ranks are a little bit different, right? Because maybe mine's
Sure.
maybe a little bit more short term or whatever. But I like that. And I could see by the end of this process, me having Trey Benson up in that neighborhood, in which case I'd have to get Jonathan Brooks up in the same neighborhood as you as well, I think. So I like it, Wiz. You're making me think about these dynasty rankings as we go through this show, and that's
The
what I
uh
like.
the the way I look at these guys, Trav, is I think that these guys are probably going to be the cheapest they are right now.
Yeah,
I think as the year goes on and people start to realize that, not that people haven't realized this already, but maybe the casual player hasn't. But as soon as we get to October and November, I guarantee you're going to start seeing tweets: "Go buy Trey Benson right now because James Conner is out at the end of the year." Well, newsflash, maybe just like try and go do it right now, right?
yeah,
Because he's going to be more expensive if you're trying to go get him in October.
yeah. And he's in that kind of like top third of the second round as well. So decent
Yep.
capital in rookie drafts there. And I think it's just super interesting that these running backs were said to be one of the worst classes, and then they went to like banger landing spots, in my
I know.
opinion. If
Yeah.
we include these third round guys and then Jonathan Brooks and then another guy that we're, especially one other guy that we're going to talk about in the fourth round. But to stick to the third round, Wiz, we got lots of wide receivers that went there. This is where
Yep.
lots of questions abound, because we're going to be taking those late second, early third shots on some of these guys in rookie drafts, and we needs to know. So if we look at Malachi Corley, he was the first wide receiver off the board in the third, went to the Jets with pick number 65. Jermaine Burton went to Cincinnati, pick number 80. Both awesome landing spots. Roman Wilson, the Roman Empire will now be built from steel, went to Pittsburgh, and he was the 84th pick. I love that fit too. Then Jalen McMillan, somebody who I was maybe a little bit higher than consensus on, went to the Buccaneers at 92. And then Luke McCaffrey with the last pick of the third round. So let's look at these guys. So maybe let's start firing maybe a little quicker on some of these guys as we get through the draft, Wiz, but let's talk about it because it's all worth it, right? So Malachi Corley, I think the hope for him is that he can come in and he can be kind of that Randall Cobb slot role for Aaron
Yep.
Rodgers, doing a bunch of his work after the catch because we know that's his calling card. What do you think about Malachi Corley in that landing spot? I think as a team we were maybe a little bit down on him, but he was very polarizing. So did that landing spot move the needle for you when it comes to Malachi Corley?
Not really. I think when you think about Rogers' track record with rookies, it's suspect at best as far as
Yeah.
trust. And looking at Malachi's college profile, really fun player. Like I don't want to take that away from him at all, but really low ADOT player, bit of a gadget player, if you will. But again, extremely exciting if he can figure out how to start, kind of making more of an impact and running some more of those routes down the field. That would really be interesting. I think that the blueprint for success that you'd like to see for him is maybe something similar to how the Chiefs used Rashee Rice last year, right?
Yeah.
Is like very close to the line of scrimmage, really kind of take over that middle area of the field there. Really short stuff is kind of how I see Malachi, but like you've got Brees Hall in the backfield and you've got Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson on the outside. So yeah, look, I think he's a fun player, but not necessarily someone I'm targeting from a dynasty perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm looking at that draft, and Malachi Corley went at the 310, which I don't think is terrible value. But I think the problem for me is that I don't think he fully hits his stride, even if he gets work with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers boosts him, but I don't know if he fully hits his stride and carves out his place in this offense until Aaron Rodgers is gone. And then we've got a
Mm,
whole bunch more kind of turbulence around his situation, let's say, since we're talking about the Jets, not knowing what the
nice.
quarterback situation.
Nice.
You like that? You like that?
Yeah, that was really good.
I didn't even think about, like, as I said, turbulence. I
That
wasn't
was
even
good.
thinking about the link to the Jets, but I was like, man,
Yeah,
fuck. Kind of a rapper, no big deal, guys. In case you
that was
watched
good.
last episode, yeah. So yeah, we don't mind that spot with the Jets. Shout out to Abe and the boys doing Jets Uncovered. Make sure you go check that out and follow all of the work for your favorite team. I think we have like 8, 9, 10 teams on board now. Wiz is one of the 2 participants in Patriots Uncovered on the Dan and Dan show, I like to call it. Love what you guys are doing over there. Shout out to Greinberg. Shout out to Abe for all of the work on Uncovered, because people are liking it, man. It's really good. Jermaine Burton, 80th pick
Mm.
to Cincinnati. You liked this one, Wiz. Tell me what you think about it.
I did. This is probably my favorite pick out of the third round wide
Okay.
receivers. Really not close for me either. So, obviously this is a guy that from a little bit character concerns, we kind of heard coming in the draft. We know of that incident, he had on the field there at the Tennessee game with that, that girl. But all that aside, right? Really like exciting talent. Tough guy, is not afraid to go over the middle, really strong hands. As Zach Taylor mentioned in his press conference, didn't have one drop. The way I look at this is from, that dynasty perspective is he's attached to Joe Burrow and T Higgins is likely out the door next year. Right. So I just see a world with him where as long as he keeps his head on straight, that he's probably the wide receiver 2 in that offense next year. And, if we can see, maybe he gives us a little Tyler Boyd feel this year as he gets up to speed and works his way up and, gets up to speed with that offense through that kind of slot role. And then we see him go on the outside a little bit. They can kick those guys around, right? We've seen Chase kick into the slot at times. So, but I love his outlook long term because I think he's the wide receiver 2 in a Joe Burrow offense next year.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think even if T. Higgins were to leave this year, I don't know if we would necessarily steam Burton way up the ladder versus how we might next year if he's only the wide receiver 2. Because if T. Higgins goes, I could
Yeah.
see like a Tyler Boyd coming back into the fold. But I think
Mhm.
what that does is that puts Tyler Boyd into the slot and lets Jermaine Burton play on the outside, in which
Exactly.
case there's a little bit more ceiling that comes along with that position there. So I like what you said on Jermaine Burton, and I feel pretty much the same. Another offense we want to attach to. I think one of my favorites in this group was Roman Wilson. I love that
Mhm.
fit in Pittsburgh. Definitely have some questions about volume in that run heavy offense with old Artie Smith. But we know that George Pickens can be a little bit streaky, maybe a little bit sporadic. And I think Roman Wilson does a lot of things that George Pickens doesn't, right? He
Yeah.
does a lot of that over the middle work. He does a lot of that dirty stuff. He does a lot of blocking, which I think is going to be a big piece of his ability to get on this field with the Pittsburgh
Agreed.
Steelers. I think he's the wide receiver 2 there. And while, he might not get a ton of volume because they run the ball a lot, I think the volume he gets, he can make the most of it and maybe carve out some role, because I don't think, just because of what we've seen with Arthur Smith previously, I don't think that means that 100% we will not get a second wide receiver that produces out of this offense. I think we just need to be a little bit cautious as to how we attack that, because that is a possibility with Roman Wilson. Other guy that I like here, Wiz, and I'll give you the chance to come and check back in
Yeah.
on these guys yourself, was Jalen McMillan. And I think that's just
Mhm.
because people are dogging that spot. And I don't think it's as bad as everybody thinks. Sure,
Yeah.
it's attached to Baker for maybe the long term. We don't know if that's long term, but I think everybody's seeing Godwin and Evans. And I think he's just a year two proposition, basically, for me. Godwin, they can get out of that contract after this season. And I would
Yep.
expect them to do so, especially with taking Jalen McMillan with the second pick. He profiles as a predominant slot receiver. I think he was over 90% in college
Yep.
at Washington. And there were times where he was outproducing Jalen Polk. In fact, last year, if he didn't get hurt, he was tracking to probably have a better season than did Jalen Polk. So I think Jalen McMillan is live to return on the investment that you're going to put into him. When I look at kind of where he's going in the drafts that we've been in, 312. So he's going behind Malachi Corley, and I would take him ahead of Malachi Corley. Absolutely. What's your thoughts on Jalen McMillan and Roman Wilson, Wiz?
Yeah, so it's funny, Trev, because in the beginning, right after the draft, I really hadn't put too much. I was one of those guys that didn't really like the landing spot for Jalen McMillan, and then I was thinking about it. I was actually talking about it with Danny Kelly a little bit earlier today. He was like, "Hey, I keep ending up with Burton," and one of the things we talked about was like why I like Burton and his outlook and everything like that. And then I just took a deeper look at Godwin, realizing that they can get out of that contract next year as well. So why am I not thinking about McMillan the same way that I am thinking about Burton? And that's when I've kind of started to come around on McMillan a little bit more. Because you're right, like he was pretty productive at Washington during his time there, even with both Polk and Adunze going in the same draft. From a model score perspective, he came in the 73rd percentile, which is it's a very solid score. He's better than, or just about better than 3/4 of the 215 wide receivers that we've run through it, right? So I think he's a guy that's probably being slept on too much at this point in drafts, especially if you mentioned there that he just went almost the end of the third. For a third round wide receiver that could be the predominant slot player next year, I think that's a nice investment. As far as Roman Wilson, look, I think he can do some things. I think he is very different than George Pickens. To your point, I would have some of the same concerns you do. He does some things that he doesn't do, but also at the same time, the volume is probably not going to be there. Um, that's kind of not a guy that I'm probably targeting at this point, just because as long as he's going to be a wide receiver too in an Arthur Smith offense, I'll just look elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And maybe I'm kind of looking down the road a little bit and thinking, you never
That's
know
fair.
if Arthur Smith's going to be there long, but those are all the same concerns I have, just maybe a little bit more rosy on that. I think that could be a fun little group. Luke McCaffrey was also in that third round. We did talk about how he fits in with that offense in Washington already, though. Other just skill position player that was taken was Tip Ryman. On the show sheet, I've got in quotes just the tip, because I think that would be a quality nickname. And speaking of just the tip, I know almost nothing about this guy. Is this the guy that doesn't believe in birds?
This is the
This the
guy
one
that
you're
does
talking
not
about?
believe in birds. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah.
hate him.
Fun Tip Ryman nugget.
Yeah, okay, I hate him.
Yeah,
That's
look, I
dumb.
mean, the Tip Ryman, it was kind of a curious pick, right? You've got Trey McBride there. I will say he's like an athletic freak. I think his RAS score ranked 10th out of like 1,200 tight ends since 19, out of the last 1,200 tight ends, he was ranked 10th from a RAS perspective. So look, super athletic. But just wonder if he's kind of made for that offense from a blocking tight end perspective, right? That can leak out and do some things. And maybe if he gets the ball in his hands, can make some plays. But let's make no mistake about it. Like this is, if anything, they're trying to free Trey McBride up to run more routes. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Trey McBride gravitate towards more of that, like Kelsey, Kincaid, True, just like Mark Andrews, just run your routes, bro, and get out of there.